Thank you all for joining us this morning. There's a few more people logging in, but it's probably worthwhile we get started. We've got quite a lot to cover today. As I say, my name's Simon Favag. I've been joined by Vishal Karavadra, and we're from Experience. And our plan for this morning is to look or go through Sage 200 tips and tricks. It's the first of 2 sessions, so we've creatively called this one Session 1. So yeah, thank you all for joining us. Vish, if you can go to the next slide, please. So yeah, very quickly, Experience, we drive business efficiencies through digital transformation. Now, what does that mean? Next slide, please, Vish. Essentially, it's all about sort of connecting business systems together. So there's 4 we see them as 4 key pillars within Experience Group. Many of you will know us for perhaps dealing with one product from us, perhaps Sage 200 as an example, but actually within the business, we concentrate on what we see as 4 key areas: ERP, in which Sage 200 resides; cloud, hosting Sage 200, hosting your whole network or other applications; CRM, there's a CRM module within Sage 200, and then managed IT. And digital transformation is really kind of leveraging all those key areas which encompass the entire business to sort of drive the efficiencies that you need. So connecting your CRM to your ERP, hosting it in the cloud so you can access it from anywhere, not just from the office, and so on. So just a very brief thing about us and what we do. If we can go on to the next slide, I'll hand over to Vishal and a bit of a high-level agenda of what we're going to look at today. A couple of points to mention. If we can ask any questions, there's a sort of a question panel. If you can pop them through there, and we will pick those up at the end, if that's okay. So just answer any questions as we're going through, and we'll definitely come back to them. And the session is being recorded, so we will be able to send you a link to the recording so you can have a look afterwards and sort of recover any areas that Vishal goes through today. So yeah, thank you again for all your time, and I'll hand over to Vishal.
Hi there, thank you, Simon. Okay, hi, my name is Vishal Karavadra. I'm one of the Sage 200 consultants at Experience. And today we're going to go over a little tips and tricks session. It's something that I started to do when I go out and train. We've had quite a lot of positive feedback from this little session that I sort of run. And it should help you speed up using Sage, more efficient, getting to your normal areas a lot quicker than you normally do, and using some of the sort of hidden areas in Sage that speed things up. So we'll have a look at the look and feel. We'll look at homepage options and favorites, little hidden menus that you find on the right click, and things that you don't visually see straight away, things that help you navigate faster, logging into more than one company, a little bit of guidance on the best way of using the help, and a little function of exporting to Excel, which they added in one of the few versions, older versions that came out, and a little look at Workspaces. So Workspaces is how you inquire in the system. So we'll have a little look at that, make sure people are using them, because it's a much faster way to search for things. Okay, so I'm just going to switch it over to my virtual machine here. And all right, okay, so get rid of this, and I'm just going to log into the Sage 200 application. Okay, while it's doing that, I'm just gonna bring it back here. Okay, so we're now logged into Sage. So when you first log in, you come to this default homepage, which is sort of like a website style that will give you links and take you to different areas, which you can see here. So, you know, day to day, this is probably not the main page that you want to see when you first come into Sage, and I'll show you how we can change that. But at the top here, there's some other little buttons that you see. So you've got a getting started area, which just helps you go to certain functions in Sage. A key area is this homepage favorite. So you can start setting up favorites from here. And you also have frequent areas that you've been in the system recently. So these are all functions. If you click on these will actually take you to the areas that you have been recently within the system. So it's a handy little page. I've seen a lot of users actually use this when I go out on site. So it's a way where you can navigate into the system using the frequently accessed or your homepage favorites. I'll talk about the homepage favorites in a little bit more detail in a moment. But what we'll do today is we'll look at all the little buttons that you see at the top right, the little buttons that you see here in the top left, talk about the favorites, popping in, popping out, search functionality. Then we'll look at what we see at the bottom. So this is what you have open and the rolling history of where you've been. And then we'll start looking at workspace inquiries at the end. Okay, so quick little functions that you see at the top here that people probably don't use. There's like a homepage button, which will always take you back to the main homepage if you click on it. So if I just navigate away and go to the customer list, this will actually always take you back to whatever you say your homepage is. So currently my homepage is this default page, and it takes me back to this web style looking page. Okay, now this stage 200, you can actually click on that and it will also take you back to the application homepage, or you can reset any homepage settings that we do. So when you're logging into Sage, you don't really want to see this main screen all the time. You possibly work in the sales ledger or the nominal ledger, and you may want to see that list when you log in. So any inbuilt screen, so a screen that doesn't pop out, so it can be a process map, it can be a list, it could be a workspace. So any screen that doesn't pop out, you can right click on that screen form function from the menu, and the top option says make this my home page. So if you set that for any of these items, close Sage, and then the next time you log back in, it will take you to the area you've told Sage, is my home page. Okay, so we're coming into Sage and it's took me straight to the customer list. So any area you tend to work in, I always recommend set it to your home page, and then when you log in, Sage will take you there. If you do want to go back to the application page, you click on Sage 200 and then show application page. It's a little bit hidden, but you can get back to it that way if you do want to come back to this page. Now if I click on this home button, it's going to take me to the customer list, as that's what I've set to be my home page. Okay, so that's what these little buttons here do at the top left. It's not very clear, but that's what they actually do. Next to that, you have a pop in, pop out function. So if you have a smaller monitor and you want a little bit extra desk space, you can click on that little arrow and it will pop this window in, and then it will keep popping out every time you click on a particular icon. Click away and it will then pop back in. So if you've got small monitors, it's quite a handy function to give you that little bit extra desk space. If you click on the pin, it pins it back. So it's an arrow when it's not pinned, and then when you want to unpin it, you click on the pin and it's now fixed. Okay, so that's what these little buttons do. Below that, we have this burger looking icon, as I call it, and this star. So the burger looking icon is your main menu. So depending on what system rights you've been given, you're going to see every single function you've been given here. Now, for your day-to-day work, you're not going to go ahead and use everything within this menu. So what I always recommend is come into this star area, which is your favorites, and you can go ahead and add all the key functions that you do daily, regularly, end of month, reports that you run, anything that you do regularly, you can set them up in here. How do we do that? So there's a couple of ways of doing it. So if I come over to, let's say, the sales ledger, right click, there's a lot of key functions in this right click. It's one of those hidden areas I was talking about. And in there, you've got add to favorites. So if I click on that and now go check my star, there is my first item in my favorites list. If I click on it, it's obviously going to take me to the list, which I'm already in, but we can continue to do that. So if we go to the transaction area and say I invoice, so we can right click, add to favorites. Now we have the invoice function. So if I click on this, it will now actually take me to the sales invoice. Okay, so I do recommend creating your favorites and setting them up. I'll show you you can structure that in a moment. I'm now going to go and do an inquiry, and the transaction inquiry, right click. I'm not going to actually right click and add that to favorites. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open this form up, just make this a bit smaller. Right, so I've opened the form up. Now in the form, in the top section here, you see the star as well. So if I click on that, it goes yellow. Yellow indicates that that is in your favorites. If you unclick it, it will take it back out. Okay, so I'm just going to click on that, close this form down, go check my favorites. So now you can see I've got 3 items within there. Now, how do you structure this? So, we don't want it in a flat file. We can start grouping these, subgrouping these, and renaming these if you really want to. You can see that this just says invoice. So we may want to make that a bit clearer and say customer invoice or sales invoice. Because if you add this from purchase, it will probably come back with purchase as well, and it'll only say invoice. So sometimes it can be a bit confusing if it's got the same name. So do rename them if they do have same names. Right, so how do we edit? So when you're in this area, so you're in your burger looking icon, you come to your favorites, and then next to there is this pencil. Clicking on the pencil puts it into this green edit mode. Okay, so when you're in green edit mode, you've got some buttons here at the top. So making sure you've got the root header selected, click on the plus button and it'll create a new folder for you. So I'm going to call this one sales. Okay, I put sales, press enter. Now, before I start moving things into there, I want to rename this invoice because it's just says invoice. So I'm going to call that sales invoice. There's a rename button at the top. Click on that, and now we can call this something entirely different. So I'm just going to add sales to the beginning of it. Click away, and that's now saved. Okay, so I've created my folder. I named it sales. I renamed this to sales invoice. How do we move things into here? We simply drag and drop. So we drag it and drop it down. Now, a little tip here, if you've got lots of folders, it will start to pop these folders open when you're moving across them. So what I advise is to drag round and down and into the group, and then that will stop that problem happening. So if you get that issue, just drag it round and down into the group you want, and then it will stop the other folders opening as you drag straight down. Okay, so now I've just created one folder, and within there, I've grouped these items up. So what I want to do now is I'm going to create one more folder within here for reports that I may run. So I'm going to make sure sales is selected and then add a folder in there, create that as reports. Okay, so that's saved down. So I'm going to come out of this edit mode. If you're in the green edit mode, you can't actually run these functions. You have to come out. Now you're out, and now the functions will actually work. Okay, so if I click the sales invoice, we can now start using the menu. So I'm just going to add a couple of reports. So back to my main menu and down into the report section. And let's go and get transaction listings. Add to favorites. Okay, right click. It's there at the bottom. Go into green edit mode. And then drag that into sales and then into reports. Click away. And now we have our subfolder with our report within it. If I click on that, it will then fire up the transaction listing for me. Okay, so it is worth doing this. A little bit of a tedious job the first time you do it, but once you've got it set up, it's done. And it's saved. So then, you know, hopefully it should speed up doing your day-to-day jobs rather than having to work through the main menu. You can always just come to your favorites and do what you normally do. And then if you really have to go and find something that you do, you know, occasionally, then use the main menu and find that item and do it. Okay, so back into the favorites, the homepage favorites. So I was talking about homepage favorites earlier. If you do want to use the application homepage and the homepage favorites from here, then you've got a little bit of guidance with what you do, but all you need to do is just drag the items into this homepage favorites folder that's there by default. So if I just edit, and I'm just going to add the customer list and the transaction inquiry. Okay, so there's two bits that I've just dragged into the homepage favorites folder. Come away, and then now in your homepage favorites you have these icons. So that's another way of setting up a list of key items that you do regularly and then just accessing them from here. Okay, so there's two ways of doing it, either from the default application homepage or from the normal page, and just use the favorites icon, and you'll always have the items still within here. So it's either or. Okay. Now I have seen people use the favorites for new users. You can come in and set up a structure and say 1, do this, 2, do this, 3, do this, and give them a step-by-step way of doing things. So they just come in and start, okay, I'll do this first, then I do this, then I do this. And people use that in a way of getting people up to speed quickly. You can also export these. So if you are doing something like that, you can right click and export this, save this down on a network location. It saves it as a FAB file. And then on a second computer or a new user, you can come to here, right click and import, and then import that favorites file in, and it will bring that entire structure straight in for the new user. Okay, so you can export and import your favorites. Okay, so that's a little bit on the favorites. Okay, below the favorites, we have a search box. So if you know you found something, you see a report in the system, but I can't find it now, type the name, hit enter, and it will look through your entire list and show you all the results where it contains that name. So I've just searched for debtors, and it's showing me all the options available. I can then right click on this and say, show me it. Where is it in the menu? It will take me to that location, so sales, ledger, reports, credit control, age, debtors. And then from here, if you do use it regularly, right click, add it to your favorites, so you know you don't have to find it again. Okay, so that's a search function that you have at the top. Right, okay, so a little hidden trick or a little handy feature that I tend to use quite a lot. If you pop open this menu, you can tend to get lost and you have to sort of close everything down. So a real handy tip, right click and collapse all. That's going to snap the entire list back down and you can start to search for something. So whenever I'm generally searching through this list, first thing I'll do is just right click, collapse it all, and then try to find what I'm looking for. It's a much quicker way of getting to what you're looking for. Okay, so yeah, right click and collapse all. Okay, so what else do we have hidden in that right click? So if you guys use a particular list regularly, while you still want to be using the rest of Sage, what you can do is that any screen that doesn't pop out. So if I go to the invoice screen, this is a screen that pops out. If I had 2 monitors, I could have moved that over to a second monitor. But all the screens that don't pop out, so your sales list, or any of the workspace inquiries that I'll show you later, these don't pop out, but on the right click, you can force them out. So if I say the customer list, right click, and in here you've got open a new window. Very handy if you've got 2 screens. So you can now grab this entire customer list, move it over to your other screen while you still got the entire Sage application to work from in the middle. Like me, I've got 3 screens at home, so I can technically then pop out the nominal list and then have that on the other screen. And you've got all of the functions within the list views to actually do the jobs that you may be doing for your inquiries or invoicing and then so forth. So again, it's a very handy tool. It's a little bit hidden, but you can force out any window in Sage that doesn't normally force out. So you can minimize these, and then you can access them using the Windows toolbar to go to the customers or the nominals, and you've still got the entire Sage application. Okay, so right click on any inbuilt screen and open a new window. That's quite a handy tool. I'm just going to close a couple down. Another question that I get quite regularly that people didn't actually know is that you can fire up another session of Sage. So if you've got multi-company and you need to check figures in another company, you can just simply double click on the icon again on your desktop. So if I just move this out of the way, double click on Sage again, it's just going to take me to a new instance. If you've got more than one company, it will give you the company selection, and then you can select the second company, or it will even let you into the same company. So, if you need to do cross-referencing, or if you need to do just even certain checks, you could be in the system doing a particular job that's stopping you doing something else. If I was doing a purchase order and I've created a new purchase order and I've put a load of lines in here, and then somebody asks me to do a particular job or I get a phone call, I don't need to close down what I'm doing. I can just start a new version of Sage and then just go in, do the particular inquiry, let the customer know or the colleague know, and then come out of that session and continue to carry on with what you was doing before. So again, it's another handy tool. Just fire up another version of Sage for cross-referencing, or if you just need to check something while you're doing something. Okay, so that's a little bit of popping out windows on the right click for any screen that doesn't pop out by default, and how you can fire up new sessions of Sage. Okay, so I think that covers most of the bits within the actual list view that I wanted to talk about. We're going to come over and look at the workspace inquiry after I've talked a little bit about some of the remaining functions that we've got in the system. Okay, so near the bottom, what do we see here? So the first thing is who's logged on and a timestamp. So if somebody in system administration requires your username, it tells you what your system username is there. It's probably the only benefit of that bit. After that, you have any open windows that you have in Sage. So this is any screen that currently actually pops out. So if I come over to purchase inquiries, transaction inquiry, sales inquiry and transaction inquiry on the sales side, if I had these minimized, down here now it says that, look, you've got 2 open windows and you can flick between them from here if need be. The most handy option probably is that if you want to come out of Sage, you probably know that it will say you can't because you have windows open. So the quickest way would be to just click on here and close all. Close them all down. If there was anything that needed to be saved, it would ask for it, and now you can come out of Sage. After that, what do we see? This is like a rolling history of any inbuilt screen that you've been in. So again, a screen that doesn't pop out, it's a rolling history, and it's very handy actually. So if I just go ahead and open up some more lists, I'll open the supplier list, the nominal list. I'll do a nominal current transaction workspace inquiry, and you can see as I'm opening these up, they add to the history here. I still forget sometimes that they're down here. So while I'm using Sage, it is the quickest way to actually flick back between the recent lists you've been working in or an inquiry, rather than having to go back to the menu to find where that list item is. So if you remember, you do have these as you log into Sage, it builds, and then it's just fall off the shelf history. The more you open up, the older ones will disappear. Okay, so that is what these actually do right at the bottom here. Okay, so the last little bit at the top. So this top section here is where we've got a few key functions. So the first thing is the spool. People may use the spool, people may not. So what the spool does, it's an area of Sage where you can tell it to hold everything you try to print, and then you come to here and do all the printing you need to do. So when you hit print in the report to fire it up, you won't see anything, it will be sitting here, and then you can always print it later. So if it's a very large report that you don't want to print now, do it at the end of the day, you can spool it and then go print it at the end of the day. Certain reports, if I run them today, they're going to be different next week. So if you want to keep a history of that within Sage, you can spool them, and then, you know, if I look at and come into here, I can run those same reports off that I ran a week, a month ago, and so forth. Okay, so that's what the spool does. New users, it's a common query because by default for all new users, it is set to spool. I'll talk about this choose output mode in a moment, but what happens for new users when they first come into the system is they'll go to a particular report and they'll try to run it. So if I say, let's try the list of accounts, they'll hit print, and then they'll say nothing's happened. So what's going on? And they'll keep trying to print that, and then they'll end up calling support. But what it's actually doing is it's putting it into your actual spool, and then you print it from the actual spool area. Okay, now so where that is, it's in the cog, and in the cog you find choose output mode. So for all new users, generally you want to set that to preview and press OK. So then when they do actually try to print something, it will actually print and show you where that is, show you that actual report. Okay, so that's what the spool is. If you want to spool items, you know, you can still do it from the preview screen. There's a button to spool, and it'll put them in here, or you set your option to go to spool, and then you print from the spooler whenever you need to do any printing. So that's what this first icon is. Now in the actual cog is where you find change company, user logon status, which is something I think all users should have access to. Whenever you look at this screen, it shows you any disconnected logons to Sage. So if there's a lock, so someone's not quite disconnected from Sage correctly, it creates a lock on the database and stops other users from accessing certain screens. So there should never be any disconnected logons. So if you ever get a message in Sage saying that you can't go into a screen because another user is already in that screen, the first thing you should do is just come to the cog and come to user logon status, and is there anything in this list? If there is, you log them off. Okay, there's no harm in logging off any disconnected users. You log them off and it just clears the logs to the database. You do have a users tab here, and it's a little bit confusing because people think you can log people off, but you cannot ever log somebody off from Sage. This button is always grayed out. It's only active from the disconnected logon screen. So users clear these off, then try to go back to that area in Sage where you was getting a message that says you can't, and hopefully it should actually let you in if it was a lock giving you that problem. Okay, so that's in the cog, and I suggest that all users should have it because it stops them from working. If you do have a lock in the system, they should be cleared. So there's no harm in giving this function to users. The only other area they see is whoever's actually logged on to the system. Okay, so in the cog, that's one thing that I'd recommend users have. After that, you've got some basic preferences. You can change the color scheme. I'll let you play with these. You need to restart the application, but you can change the color to make it lighter if need be, change the spacing, and you can come and reset all desktop settings from here if need be. It will change all your column widths and stuff back that it saved in its user config. And you can disable notifications. So every time you create something or do something in Sage, Sage will tells you, it says, oh, you've just done something. If you find that annoying, you can turn that off from here. Okay, so what else do we have in the cog? After that, we've got the report designer. So people that have report designer knowledge, you can, do tweaks or changes or create your own reports. And then the final thing is the about. So there's no help and about, it's cog and about, and you've got your Sage version numbers within here. So if support or somebody asks you for what version you're running, this is where you can access that information. Okay, so what else do we see in this top corner? we've got this bulb icon, which is basically the ideas hub. It's Sage's online community. Users make suggestions on this community, and then Sage tally them up at the end of the year and put like the top 10 or top 20 into the new versions. And a lot of the new functions that have come into Sage have come from the ideas hub and actual suggestions from end users. So I do recommend people go on there, have a look at what other people have suggested. You can vote for them, or create your own, and other people can vote for yours, and then hopefully, you know, they get enough votes that Sage actually then put them in. So they are active, you know, looking at that quite actively. So I do, you know, recommend using that because Sage are listening to it. After that is the star for your icons, which we've discussed. And then we've got this help. So I'm going to just talk about the help now. If you click on the help from here, it's going to take you to the root of the help. There's lots of menu options, there's videos. You navigate for the help you're looking for. So if you've got time and you want to just come to this area and, you know, read up on how Sage does things, then that's how you can access it from here. The way I'd recommend users access the help when they're actually using Sage is come into this area you actually need the help. So if I'm doing a transaction and I'm doing an invoice and I then want to get some information on this section, now press the help button, and it's context sensitive help. It will take you to the help you're actually looking for. So again, it's a massive time saver. You're not searching for the help yourself. Sage is taking you to the area that you're currently in right now. So whichever area you're in, if you need help, just, you know, make sure you fire that section up, and then Sage is going to take you to the help that you're looking for. So if I again do it from transaction inquiry, hit the help, and we're there straight away in the transaction inquiry. Okay, so definitely the best way to find out what you're looking for. Just make sure you're in the screen that you're looking for the help, then hit the help. Okay, so I think that covers most of the little functions that we've got here. So that's more or less the look and feel of Sage sort of covered within within what you see. So again, the application homepage buttons that I talked about, the popping in, the popping out of the windows. Sorry, the menu, so you've got a little bit extra desk space. We talked about the favorites and how we add things into favorites and group, subgroup, and rename. We talked about the homepage favorites. If you just add the items into here, then on the application homepage, you can see these homepage favorites. We then start looking at the search functionality and how you can then search for anything that you have in your list. Popping out the windows, the right click function. So your homepage on the right click, the popping out to new windows, the adding to favorites, and the collapse all to quickly navigate to a new section within the menu. We moved over to the history of what you've currently got open in Sage and where you've been. And these are like the quickest way to flick back between the recent inbuilt screens that you've been working in. And then we talked about the functions that we see at the top here. So the spool. We talked about user logon status to stop if Sage is stopping you from doing any work, clear out the disconnected logons. The output mode, preview will show you what you've got. Spool will send stuff to the spool to be printed. And then the report designer and the about. Okay, so quick little bit that they've got in the list views that was added recently. So in the list, you now have the search function, which they never had in the older version. So you can very quickly in your list view, just go and type any characters and it will look against all the columns and then pull back results where it's found those characters. Okay, so by default, on the right click in the list, you have options for, again, these are hidden options. So you can right click, turn on and off columns. You can export to Excel, which I assume most people know how to do, but you can turn columns on and off. So by default, I think postcode is off. So if I tried to search for a particular postcode here, at the moment, Sage wouldn't come back with anything because it wouldn't really find those search results. So if I put PE3, it's not got anything. If you need to search for something and you've got it, you know, you've got some information into hand, check what columns are available in all your list views and turn on the columns you potentially want to search for. Okay, so I've turned on that postcode column now. And if I put BI64, I think I could just see somewhere. Yep, BI64, it's now instantly shown me where that one record within this list. Okay, so the search box is very handy, but you know, turn on the columns because it will only search against columns that are actually physically turned on. So right click in the list views, add columns, have a review of what you see here and just turn on or off columns that you want to be working on. Okay, all right, so we've talked about the list view. talked about the multiple companies. So I think the last bit that I really needs to really cover is Workspaces, which is it's a little bit of a big section, but it's a much better way of searching, or a different way of searching in the system to get to information you're looking for. So if I fire up a traditional screen, so if I go into your module that you want to do any inquiries for, you always have an inquiry section within every module. The traditional inquiry sections have the square block. All of the new Workspaces inquiries have this globe icon. So if you're in Sage and you're looking through your menu that you've been given via your system administrator, if you don't see these globes, it means you've never had access to a workspace. When they first came out and Sage released them, they was a little bit slow and a little bit clunky, so people didn't tend to really try to use them as much because they wasn't as fast as how they are now. But they're really optimized now, so they are much quicker than when they first came out. So if you use them in the early days and thought, oh, I don't like them, do have another look, because they have much sped them up and added more functions to them. So what is a workspace? If I come into a workspace, so I've just clicked on the current transactions. It's like a web style searching screen. It can have 1 pane, 2 panes, 3 panes, and gives you visible different information as soon as you click on the line at the top. The bottom information updates depending on what you've selected at the top. Okay, so this is a current transactions workspace. If I open up a traditional screen, so the normal inquiry screen, and just talk about some of the differences. So in a normal inquiry screen, you're fixed to looking for just one particular record. You're fixed to the columns that you see here, so you can't turn these on, you can't turn these off, you can't search on these columns. To get further information, you have the drill down at the bottom here, so if you want to see nominals, this is how you'd traditionally do it, and then you'd flick between them. So you're stuck to one record, you're stuck to these columns, and you can't search in here unless you export this to Excel and then start playing around with it in Excel. The same functions in a workspace. So if I just minimize that, this is a customer transaction workspace. So I'm not tied down to just one record. If I want to just tie down to one record, I start to type, and now it's going to just show me all transactions for that one record. If I click on the items, you see the nominal analysis straight away at the bottom, and you can continue to filter this down. So if I want to just see credit notes, I don't want to see the invoices, we're now instantly looking at all credit notes for RB. If we wanted to look at all credit notes in the system, let's knock out RB, and now we're looking at just credit notes that we have within the system. So this can be right-click and exported like you would in the normal list view. So again, you can filter and narrow the list down very quickly and export it out if need be, or get to the information you're looking for very quickly. So if you've got a reference number to hand, 0342, very quickly, you're going to get to that transaction. If it's a customer on the phone or a colleague, you can very quickly get to that information and start speaking to them about, any inquiries they may have. So you've got the multiple searching, and you've got the panes at the bottom. Something to keep an eye out when you've got multiple panes that's not very clear is that you've got further information if there's these 2 little arrows here. So if I click on that, here's our breakdown. So we've got the analysis, the transaction detail, the allocation details. This is all here by just flipping over to it. And then if I clear my search, again, if I now select the different items, you're now seeing different information at the bottom, depending on what you've selected within the drop down. You can flip that back to nominal, and now we're looking at the nominals. Okay, so let's just clear this one out. All right, okay, so what we've got multiple searching that we can do. We've got the split pane, and we've got the further drill down when we keep an arrow for the 2 little arrows. Now, like I said, there could be more than one pane. So I think if I go to this credit control one, this is a 3 pane workspace. So we have 3 sets of information depending on what we've clicked on. On this side is where we've got the drop down. So here is where we've got the further information for contact details and so forth if we want to flip between them. Okay, so depending on what type of workspace you're in, you're going to see different information in more than one pane of data. Okay, so what else can we do within a workspace? In a traditional list view, or in the inquiry you can't, but in a list view, when you double click, it takes you now to the transaction inquiry. In a workspace, it does the same thing. So I'm going to actually go to my history from the bottom this time. And then if I double click, it's gonna, in this case, take me to the transaction inquiry. Okay, now in a workspace, we have all of the columns that we see, but we can turn on or off columns. Again, something you can't do in a traditional. So right click, again, it's one of the hidden options, and come into column selector. So in here, it's slightly different from a list view, how you turn columns on and off, but it's the same function. You see a lot of hidden columns. So in this hidden area, always review what we have in here, because you may want to turn on items that you're not currently seeing. So I think like second reference by default is off. But if you guys use a second reference for internal referencing and you want to search on that, all you do is you hit the plus button to turn icons on and they jump over to the visible side. So I'll just turn a few on and I'll turn a few off on this side by hitting the minus. If you want to reorder, so if I want the name before the code, you simply drag it to the first position and then that will be the item in the first column. If you want to move things to the end, you just drag them down and then they'll move into the column position of what the number position it is in this list. So always have a look at what columns are available, turn on and off the columns you want, set up your workspaces how you want them, and then that's saved. So every time you come back to that workspace, it will have your same settings. So what I always recommend to users is a bit of trial and error. Come into your inquiries, make sure you have your workspaces. If not, speak to your system administrator, and then just look through the workspaces. What are they giving you? If it's something you think you find useful, right click, add it to your favorites, so you've got it into your favorite section, you know it's a workspace you like, and then you know you can continue to use that workspace whenever you're doing any of your normal inquiries. Okay, so we talked about the right click. What else do we have? So we have the actions, which just take you to functions in Sage. So it's actual account inquiry or sales inquiry or transaction inquiry. You can run reports from here, depending on reports you have, exactly the same from your list view. You've got your export to Excel, exactly the same as your list view if you need to get the data into Excel, the print functions, and then there's one final thing called the action selector. So if you come into actions, it basically allows you to control what you're seeing in this menu. If you don't do all of these functions, you can clear them out from the action selector. So what do you see? If you don't want to see any of these items, you don't use them, then you can just move them over to the undisplayed, and now you won't have them in that menu. You'll have a much smaller menu of what you really do. But what you also have is this default action. So in a workspace, you can control what happens when you double click on it. So you can reprint invoices, you can correct transactions, you can do amendments of allocations. It's that little bit of extra control you've got on a double click. So currently it's on transaction inquiry. So obviously if we double click on these lines, it's going to take you to the transaction inquiry, but you can control that within the actual action selector. Okay. Okay, so that is what workspaces are. So it's a little bit of trial and error of finding them and seeing which ones you may find suitable for you. But once you do actually find the one suitable, it is, I think, the fastest way to get to any information in Sage, because if you've got all the multiple searching, you've got the split pane information, and you know you can export all the data into Excel once you've narrowed the list down to what you're looking for. If you need to put it into Excel, you can stick it all into Excel. You have all of the Amazon page functions here, or I'll call them Amazon or web style page functions, should I say. So how many pages do you, how many numbers do we see per page? So it's 25. You can knock that up to 500. But obviously the larger this number, the larger the query, it slows it down a little bit. You can flick between pages using the arrows back and forth. Take me to the last page, take me to the front page. You can use the slider to amend the size or positioning of these as well by using the slider. So you can configure these how you want. You can even do your permanent filtering. So in the list view, where you would create permanent filters using the traditional filtering, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail today. If we get enough feedback that people would like more info on filters, it's something that I can possibly do in another session. But it's where you can create permanent filters for accounts on hold, or you know, where an analysis code equals a particular value, and you then can quickly flick to these. So let me just quickly create one. So we say new, I'll call this one on hold. So I want to find all accounts that are on hold. We add the conditions. So I'll find the status column. If I can find it. Is it called status? No, it's actually called on hold, should I say? Whoops, not that one. That one. And then equals to and then we want true. Okay, so in this one, I've created a new one. I've called it on hold. I've said where the on hold column is true, save it down, close it. So now in this list, we have a permanent filter, and there it's showing me my one account that I have on hold. So that's how filters would work in Sage. You can create as many as you like, give it its conditions, and then it just takes you to that data. You can do that in Workspaces. It just looks slightly different. So from the top section here, you have this no filtering. It's a no filter, but filter. Click on it and then say create new filter. And then in here, we start to do the same job. So we give it a name, test, and then we start to add the conditions, what column, what match type, what's the value, add it in, and then save that down. So what should we do in here? Status equals full. So I'm just going to show me all full, add the line. So that's created it, save it down. And now we're only seeing transactions where the status is actually full. We click on this item here. Here is where you would see your full list, so you get a bigger list coming below here. And then if you want to clear it, click on no filtering. And then if you want to go to your created filter, select it. And now we've got a full transactions filter. Okay, so that's how you can start to create your permanent filtering within the Workspaces as well. Again, it's not something you can do in a transaction inquiry, a normal transaction inquiry. You can do it in a list view. So that's another benefit of using, the Workspace. Okay, so we're coming up to about nearly 1:45, so we've got about 5 odd minutes left. We was going to wrap up by about 10 to, so I'm not sure. Simon, was there any questions that have been coming through today?
No questions so far, but if anybody does have any questions, feel free to pop them up there, and we'll Vish will certainly be able to answer those for you.
Yeah, if there are no questions coming up right now, then you can always email questions later, and I'll come back to you as soon as possible with any questions or queries that you may have. But yeah, generally that is the sort of look and feel, tips and tricks type sessions I do. It's it's not actually using Sage for your normal day-to-day jobs, but it's areas in Sage that speed up using the system, which is the key thing. You don't want to be wasting time doing things in Sage, looking for things or inquiring or anything you can not spend time on and speeds up your day-to-day work, I think is a benefit. So hopefully it's been beneficial. Some hidden things there. Hopefully you can set up your favorites and navigate around the system a little bit quicker and a little bit faster. And I hope you enjoyed the little session.
No, I found it really useful, Vish. Thank you. There's a few bits I learned on the way with that, so thank you.
Really good, really good.
Queries, guys, just let us know. And as I said, if there's anything you want to email afterwards, so you've hopefully got our contact details, please fire away and just send anything across. What we're going to do, we're going to send out a feedback form. It'd be great if you could spare a couple of minutes to fill it in. It's only a few questions. It just really helps us sort of shape future demonstrations or some demonstrations, sort of a training seminars, so we know kind of what areas to cover, what works, what doesn't really. And as we've got on screen here, we've got a number of other webinars running, not just on Sage 200, on other sections such as Microsoft Teams, Office 365, cloud, security, and so on. They're all free. They're all sort of training-based webinars, which are trying to sort of impart as much information as possible. So feel free to sign up for any of those that interest you. No questions seem to have come through. So on the assumption that there's none outstanding, I think Vish covered a good area today. So hopefully we've answered most of the questions people had in mind. And just want to say thank you. Appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today. So really do appreciate it. And just send us an email, drop us a feedback form, and let us know. Yeah, thank you all. Appreciate you all taking your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.